This is Apropos. Well, the disclosures have raised fresh questions about the convicted sex offender's relationships with the rich and powerful. Britain's former Prince Andrew, his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson and career politician Peter Mandelson are among those who've been thrust back into the eye of the Jeffrey Epstein storm after shocking, often intimate emails with the disgraced financier were released by the US Justice Department. Donald Trump, Elon Musk and Bill Gates were also mentioned in the tranche of 3 million documents. With the latest on the fallout and the reaction to the disclosures in the United States, here's Monty Francis.
Donald Trump had a well-documented relationship with Jeffrey Epstein before a falling out in the early 2000s, and the latest release of millions of pages of the Epstein files reinforces the notion that the two men were once close friends and frequently bonded over their pursuit of young women. The New York Times found that in the latest trove of documents released, Trump's name appears more than 38,000 times and in more than 5,000 files. Among the newly released pages is a list compiled by the FBI of several unverified allegations described as salacious, involving Epstein and Trump, including a victim who claimed Trump had abused her, but who ultimately refused to cooperate. Also, an unverified allegation that one of Epstein's victims had been transported to Mar-a-Lago to meet Trump. On Sunday, the Deputy Attorney General told CNN that the Justice Department had examined sexual misconduct allegations made against the president and found they had no merit.
There have been hundreds of calls made to the FBI where allegations are made by either anonymous individuals or people who are very quickly determined to not be credible.
For his part, the president lashed out early Monday at comedian Trevor Noah, who joked during Sunday's Grammy Awards about Trump's association with Epstein.
Almost as much as Trump wants Greenland, which makes sense. I mean, because Epstein's island is gone, he needs a new one to hang out with Bill Clinton.
On Truth Social, Trump wrote, "Wrong. I can't speak for Bill, but I have never been near Epstein Island nor anywhere close." While there is no credible evidence that Trump had visited Epstein's infamous island, flight records show Trump rode on Epstein's private jet at least 8 times in the 1990s and also visited his home on several occasions. Meanwhile, Democrats and some of Epstein's victims are accusing the Justice Department of a cover-up, citing the 2.5 million still unreleased pages and some 200,000 files that were heavily redacted.
Well, for more on the fallout from this latest release of documents, we're joined by Ian Reifowitz, distinguished professor at the State University of New York and author. Ian, thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. Firstly, what for you are the most significant and potentially damaging revelations in this latest tranche of documents?
I mean, where to begin? Look, I think it's important to recognize that there are a lot of embarrassing details in here. Certainly, President Trump is mentioned many, many times, but as your report said, there aren't any. There's not direct evidence of him having committed any crimes, and I don't think we've seen any new crimes in this most recent release. But we've seen, certainly, it's embarrassing to have President Trump mentioned so many times in these documents. Elon Musk, I think, looks terrible in these documents. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick looks terrible in these documents. For me, it's not so much that we're seeing embarrassing details come out. To me, it's about what are the political implications of this most recent release and of the Epstein files in general. And I think that, to me, that's the interesting question to discuss and to analyze.
And what then do you think the political fallout will be for the likes of Donald Trump? Is this going to satisfy his base, all those MAGA supporters who've been calling for greater transparency when it comes to what exactly has been in these Epstein files?
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of evidence that the MAGA base, may be cracking up a bit. Certainly, the business in Minneapolis with ICE has been one thing that has hurt Trump's support, but I think Epstein is another. I mean, you've heard Marjorie Taylor Greene, former Congresswoman, staunch Trump supporter turned Trump opponent. Last week, when the last Epstein files came out, she started talking about, how the most recent release of the Epstein files sends up the odds of an attack on Iran, intimating that Trump is going to attack Iran to distract from the Epstein files. And I think, she's one person, but she is, I think, sort of a canary in the coal mine there, evidence of people who were Trump supporters, who are staunchly MAGA and who are turning against him. You're seeing some evidence of this in elections. We've seen Democrats do well in elections all throughout the last 12 months. But just this past Saturday in Texas, you had a state Senate race where Trump endorsed a Republican. It was an open seat because the incumbent had moved up to a higher office, Texas comptroller, I believe. Trump endorsed the Republican in the district that Trump himself had won by 17 points in November 2024. The Democrat beat the Trump-endorsed Republican by 14 points. That's a huge swing. And it's bigger than what we've seen typically over the last year. So maybe that's even further evidence that the Trump brand is becoming less and less popular, even in red or conservative areas.
And what do you think is actually going to happen next? We've been hearing that this is going to be the last major release of documents. Are we likely to see Congress pushing for more transparency, though?
Well, I think Congress will keep pushing. I mean, I'm not sure. Congress passed a law which President Trump signed, requiring him and his Department of Justice to release all the files. But I think as we understand it, they've only released about half the files. So would Congress hold the Department of Justice, not the Department of Justice, but the Attorney General in contempt? I don't see that necessarily happening with Republicans in control and a majority. Could something more drastic happen if Democrats win the midterm elections and retake control of either the House or the Senate, or maybe both? Yeah, I think you could see some more then. You do have Republicans pushing. Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky is one of them, who has pushed incredibly hard and was one of the driving forces behind the law that was passed mandating that the Epstein files be released. I'm not sure where else they can go where else they'll be able to go with Republican Speaker Mike Johnson and Republican Senate Leader John Thune really having control over the floor in the House and in the Senate. And that's really where the action takes place.
And, Donald Trump, as we know, he'd been so opposed for so long to these files being released. The White House is denying that it had any role in deciding what was finally, ultimately published or not published. Do you think that is a credible stance? Do you think that the Trump administration would have had any kind of a role or influence here in what was ultimately published?
Yeah, credible is a really important word. I mean, look, we don't have any way of proving what the Trump administration said or didn't say or ordered the Department of Justice to do. We don't know that. But what we do know is that the Trump administration has, in other instances, told the Department of Justice what to do. The president has said, investigate this person, open an investigation into this person, charge this person. So if we have evidence that the president has been essentially issuing instructions to the Department of Justice, it at least suggests that it's possible that when they say, oh, well, we're not telling them what files to release, that, we should take that with a grain of salt, given the past record. Now, on the other hand, you could argue, well, they've been more when they've wanted to tell the Department of Justice what to do, they've said so openly. But in this case, maybe they can't be seen saying so openly because it would go against what the intense interest that the MAGA base has in the Epstein files, and even Trump's own campaign promises to be transparent about Epstein, to release the files, to shed light on the supposedly shadowy powerful forces that are being covered up or were being covered up by Epstein. So I think it would be impossible for him to openly say, don't release any files. But the question is, how credible, as you said, are those denials?
And, with so many women having claimed to have been abused over such a long period of time also, why were there not wider prosecutions here, as some survivors are now asking?
That's a great question, and it certainly suggests that there might have been some corruption. Mr. Acosta, who crafted the initial deal with Jeffrey Epstein over about a decade ago, reports have suggested that interviews with other prosecutors revealed that these other prosecutors were shocked at the leniency of the deal that Mr. Epstein got. So then there's a question of why did he get that deal? We're in a political environment, however, in which the president of the United States can be found liable in a civil lawsuit. We're talking about the E. Jean Carroll suit but found liable of sexual abuse. And it didn't really affect his political standing at all. I think that's another question that we have to ask ourselves is, 20, 30 years ago, wouldn't have something like that, destroyed a politician's career to have been found liable in a court of law. We're in a very different environment right now than I think, we were 10, 20 years ago. We're in the environment where Donald Trump has the ability to survive things that politicians were not able to survive in previous generations.
And speaking of former politicians, questions also being asked about Jeffrey Epstein's relationship with Bill Clinton. The House is expected to vote on whether to hold him and his wife in contempt for refusing a subpoena to testify about their possible connections with the convicted sex offender. What are you expecting there, Ian?
Well, I think, the latest news is that the Clintons have essentially agreed to what Comer, or Representative Comer wanted, but apparently it's too late now. Comer has sort of moved the goalposts. I think in the end, my guess is that if the Clintons have agreed to what they were being asked to do, that House Democrats may not vote to hold them in contempt, or a significant number may not. At the end of the day, it's certainly interesting that a former president is being called to testify before Congress, but the current president is not. Certainly the Epstein files have far worse things being suggested, even though they're certainly without corroboration and without evidence. But there are worse things being suggested about the current president than about this former president. When you've got Republicans in control of Congress and in the House of Representatives, I think you're seeing that they want to do what they can to help the leader of their party, who's President Trump, by trying to equate what Bill Clinton may or may not have done to what's been said in the Epstein files, even though there's no evidence that either one of them has committed any crimes.
Lots of questions remain, Ian. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll have to leave it there for now. That's Ian Riefowitz, Distinguished Professor at the State University of New York. Thank you. Well, that's it from us for now. Stay with us though for more world news on France 24.